question is not so much a question, but a request for you to share with us how you came to this film, to the subject matter and
Serendipitously, I guess, you know. I actually came upon this subject matter probably about 10 years ago when a friend of mine gave me a book called The Fugu Planet. And she had the rights to it. She wanted to make a movie. It's rather ambitious, probably much more ambitious than this. And then I had the good fortune of working on another film with Mr. Karasawa, the gentleman who played, the actor who played Sugihara. And he was offered we decided he wanted to work with me from a prior film that he'd seen. And then NTV, Nippon Television Films, tapped him to play Sugihara as their 70th anniversary commemoration, or 70th, it's hard to say anniversary, but the end of the war. And he said, well, if it's going to be in English, it's going to be out of the country, there's only one guy that I want directing it, and that happened to be me. So I guess I was the lucky winner of that lottery.
and so are we. Yes, great. The film, I think you said earlier when we spoke, you like to use the term inspired by historical fact, but undoubtedly there was a great deal of research that went into it to make sure that things were accurate. And could you share with us what the sources of that research were? Was it documentation? Was it interviews? And in addition to that, how much is known of the historical fact, and how much is really known about Sugihara the man, and how much of that is your artistic license
And in what order should I answer? Okay, so basically the film is loosely based on a treatise. I'm not even going to say it's a book. It's a book by a gentleman named Shira describing Sugihara's exploits as an intelligence officer. And we liked that. With the NTV Films had always wanted to make a film about Sugihara. And, you know, without any disrespect, how do you fill 2 hours with writing visas? And, you know, and that's what he's known for, but that's not what he set out to be known for, you know. So we wanted to create a film that covered that aspect and how it affected other people's lives. And as far as research is concerned, I mean, you know, I think the fact that there is a book by his widow called 6,000 Visas of Life, but beyond that, there's really not a whole lot written about him, or more importantly, I think there's nothing written by him, which I think is the biggest clue, for us anyway, of what kind of a man he was. He wasn't a man who stood on a soapbox and said, hey, look what I did today. He did what he did because he felt that was the right thing to do. You know, and I think that's the most important message that we want to get across. It's like nobody gets up in the morning and says, hey, today I'm going to be a hero. Yeah. And it didn't happen overnight either. And, you know, we took some liberties with some characters, you know, but all in all, the essential flow of the film, of the historical facts are pretty much based on fact.
In what you did learn about him, in a time when so many people who may have been able to act and save more Jews, is there anything that you can think of that you learned about him that might explain what made him decide to do? I
mean, I think, you know, the root cause or the root reason he did it is because, as I said before, because he believed it was right. I mean, I don't want to bring religion into this. I don't know. I mean, if he had converted to Russian Orthodoxy, and he was, when he lived in Manchuria, and one of the things that he did right when somebody said, you know, why did you do what you did, and against your government's wishes? And the one thing that we do have that he wrote, one of the few things that he did right, was he said, I may have disobeyed my government, but had I not done what I did, I would have been disobeying God. So was that his, you know, was that his primary reason for doing it? I don't know. I think it goes beyond just religion. You know, he did what he felt was right.
This is the film's North American debut, but it was released in Japan. It's where it opened, and I'm curious what the reception there was. Was it what you expected?
Well, you know, we had hoped for more. We always hope for more, right? But it was very well received. The first week we opened #2 in the box office, right behind James Bond. And so I guess we could say we were the top grossing Japanese film for that week. And we maintained that for the second week as well, and then on the third week, that film with the guys with the lightsabers came out and sort of blew everybody out of the water. But, you know, it didn't really affect us because we weren't a film competing against Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars did take over the market, as it did all over the world. But we maintained, we stayed in the top 5, and we stayed in the top 10 right up till about the 5th or 6th week of our 7-week first run. So we did all right. You know, the only disappointment I have is that no, it was primarily seen by older people, and I wish that, you know, younger people had seen it. And that was, you know, you saw that on the tweetosphere, or whatever you want to call it. People who were young enough to be tweeting would say, I went to see the film, I looked all around me, and everybody was much older than I was. I wish this is a film that, you know, younger people, but I learned a lot. I wish other young people would see it. So, you know, that was my only disappointment. But, you know, enough people saw it that it was declared a hit, and we're very happy with the results.
Great, that's wonderful.
Forgive our pointing.
How many people that got to Japan do you think stayed?
Not too many.
So where did they go?
A lot ended up here in America because let's remember that the first batch of refugees started arriving in Japan in late 40, early January 41, you know, and I mean late 40s, and yeah, I was right, and early 41 where there still were no hostilities between the U.S. and Japan. And therefore a lot of people, with the help of Jewish relief agencies in the U.S. and relatives in the U.S. and, you know, other groups that were able to come here. A lot ended up in Canada, some ended up in Belize, South America, and you know, I don't know that anybody ever actually made it to Curacao. But the majority of the people, unfortunately, without having any further funds or any relatives or anybody to help them out, were stranded in Kobe for a while. Then they were all deported or sent to the Japanese concession in Shanghai, where there already was quite a sizable Jewish population.
I have a follow-up question to that. Do you know who supported them? You know, in the film it's depicted that they have to have enough money to get themselves there and to transit through Japan.
Well, officially no one, but I met the Polish ambassador, the present Polish ambassador to Tokyo, and he was telling me, and you know, and he was reminding me that the Polish government in exile, or the Polish legation, or the Polish representatives of Poland and Japan did a lot to try and get their visas extended as much as possible. There was also, you know, research shows that there were those within the government who, not outwardly, but you know, made it possible to look the other way, shall we say. There was not any kind of outright, you know, cooperation, but there's cooperation without, you know, without saying anything, and a lot of people were able to stay, you know, for quite some time. And those, like I said, those with relatives. And I was reminded by a friend of mine that I went to school with, who was active in the Jewish community in Kobe, said, you know, so and so's mom was one of the people who came over, and so there were people who remained. There's also a story of an elderly gentleman who was alive well into the late 90s, and he was just an Eastern European gentleman who was the caretaker of the Jewish cemetery in Yokohama. It's another major port town just outside of Tokyo. And he had gotten as far as Japan on a Sugihara visa and had nowhere else to go, and he just stayed and looked after the cemetery, and he passed away in Japan.
Was there any involvement of the pre-existing, very tiny, but pre-existing Jewish community in Kobe?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they welcomed them in with open arms, and you know, they were the ones that essentially helped them. And whoever was able to be housed by the first several, you know, the first arrivals were housed by the Jewish community there, and those who had relatives were able to stay with them. And the rest, like I said, were spread out around the world.
Could you describe for us a little bit more what life was like for him and his family when he returned to Japan after the war?
Well, it took him 18 months to get back here. The Russians held on to him in Romania for 18 months. He did not return until 47. And as was depicted, or as was hinted in the film, he didn't have a job to come back to. And so he, as far as we know, the research that we've done, he sold light bulbs. He had a stationery store. He worked at the PX, That's the Post Exchange, the essentially the commissary, the on-base store for the U.S. military. That's one of the last jobs that we know that he had. And then, as you saw here, eventually he ended up in Moscow.
Up top.
Yeah, up top.
That was my question. As a former docent at the Bremen, I knew about Sugihara and often taught about him to all the school children that came through. But we always taught that he came back to Japan shamed and penniless and never rewarded for his good deeds. And I was just wondering why in the film you didn't really make that so clear. Why, after defying his government's orders, he got a not so substantial post in Romania. I mean, that wasn't really being punished that bad. I mean, it wasn't a plum assignment. And then you only, sort of intimated at the end what was happening to him. You really didn't, you had to sort of read into it. If you weren't familiar with him, it didn't seem like he really suffered so bad at the end.
Well, I mean, did he suffer? I mean, let's compare his suffering to, other people at that time. I mean, he wasn't publicly shamed. It wasn't like he was tied to a post and beaten. Okay, he was not recognized. I'll go with that, and I absolutely agree with the fact that he was not recognized. I just think that it would be doing a disservice to Sugihara if we kept, if we kept on and kept displaying the angst of, oh, why me? I don't think that's what the film is, and that's what the story is about Sugihara. I'm sorry if I'm sounding a little cavalier about it, but, he was not recognized. I think that's enough of a slap in the face. I don't think we need to, show him rubbing sticks together to try and start a fire in his kitchen. I'm sorry, but,
Wow, I just want to thank you for making such a fabulous film. Mr. Sugihara did so many things to put his life on the line in so many different ways. Just wondering if there's anything documented in his early life, his childhood, that might have affected the way he acted as an adult with such courage and bravery. And obviously, something was ingrained in him to do the right thing,
yeah.
no matter what the risk.
I mean, what we found, what we know and what people have told us we didn't emphasize enough is that his bravery started at an early age when he defied his father who wanted him to be a doctor and decided that, no, I'm not going to do that. And when he got into arguments with his father, he essentially left the country and went to study in Manchuria in total defiance. I mean, so are there things that formulated his behavior early in life? I think besides that he was the kind of guy that did what he thought was right. I mean, if that is exemplary of anything, I guess that's what it is. We don't have any kind of earth-shattering episode that took place or that he witnessed that caused him to behave the way that he did, except for, I believe, for his own personal beliefs. I'm sorry not to be able to give you any more than that, but like I said, I think the fact that there is so little written about him, especially by him, I think is the greatest explanation of his character. He did what he did, and he didn't do it for glory, and he didn't do it for money. And what he did ended up being a great deed.
How is he able not to avoid not being taken by the Germans, by the Nazis?
Well, let's remember that it was war, but Japan was an ally of Germany. And one of the things that dates back to the ancient Persians is the emissaries got diplomatic immunity. I mean, as we know, that's what most of the people were doing, consular corps, diplomatic corps on both sides. They were using their diplomatic immunity to their fullest. I mean, the Gestapo and the Germans could threaten him, but I don't think they could outright go out and publicly execute him. Maybe they could have done it in a back alley, but there was still, shall we say, a sense of honor among thieves, or more or less like, if I'm going to beat up on your emissary, you're going to beat up on my emissary, so we better sort of leave each other alone. I think there was that gentleman's agreement, if you can call it that, at that time, that kept him from being publicly, taken out.